عندي 106 سنين 106 سنين الحمد لله.
Hello and welcome to Meet Us on the Abraham Path. I'm Anisa Mehdi, Executive Director of the Abraham Path Initiative. Today, we celebrate the 15th anniversary of this organization's inaugural journey, a journey in November 2006 from South Central Turkey, where some believe that Abraham may have been born, Syria and down the Jordan River Valley to the city of Hebron, where many people also believe that Ibrahim and his family may be buried. That journey laid the foundation for the Abraham Path Initiative and the 1,200 miles of walking trail that we have seeded throughout the region, training professional guides and establishing a homestay program, plus our fellows program and the online programming that we're enjoying together here today. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's conversation, Dr. James K. Sebenius. Dr. Sebenius holds the Gordon Donaldson Professorship of Business Administration at Harvard University's Business School. He is vice chair of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School and a board member emeritus of the Abraham Path Initiative. Welcome, Jim.
Well, thank you, Anisa. And it is a great pleasure and frankly, something of a surprise that 15 years? How could that be? Either so short or so long. In any case, I direct the Harvard Negotiation Project, which is part of the Program on Negotiation. It's the academic sponsor of the Abraham Path Initiative as part of the Middle East Negotiation Project. And along the way, we've written Harvard Business School case studies on the path and its strategic challenges as the board and staff and friends face those questions. It's my pleasure to explore some of the last 15 years and looking forward with a remarkable panel whom I'll introduce in far briefer compass than their achievements that merit. William Ury, the founder of the Abraham Path Initiative, chair emeritus, co-author of Getting to Yes, and co-founder of the Program on Negotiation. Susan Hackley, recently retired but spectacularly distinguished managing director of the Program on Negotiation and an early, really one of the earliest members of the Abraham Path Initiative. Osama Al Nouri, a tourism expert and conservationist from Syria, an advisor to the Abraham Path, a project coordinator for BirdLife, but really has as its mandate the migratory bird flyways in 11 Middle East countries to ensure their health, and a longtime friend of the Abraham Path. And Ali Abukumail, the task leader for the 5-year project in Palestine, the economic development across fragile communities. And he was the World Bank, he was really the key person in the World Bank role, which was considerable in the development of the path in Palestine, and is the regional coordinator for innovation and entrepreneurship in the Middle East and North Africa area. So that's the who in brief. And where I'd like to turn, always more briefly than the subject merits, is to William, and really ask a simple question, which is what inspired you to undertake what many people then and even now regard as a visionary but half crazy project in this retracing the steps of the Abraham and his family.
Well, it's a great pleasure, Jim and Anisa and Osama and Ali and Susan and all of you on the call, and a lot of old friends on the call who've been on this journey with us. So we're all co-founders, we're all co-creators of this. Seemingly, a lot of people thought it was a very crazy idea, but the essence of it is connection. It's to connect people. It's to connect all of us. And the origin of it was, for me, in the time after 9/11, wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq. And it seemed like there was a feeling in the world of enormous separation, fear and separation, particularly between the Middle East and the rest of the world. And to me, the question was, how could we begin to connect what was separated? And as an anthropologist, and that's my original training, my passion is helping people get to yes, but I was trained as an anthropologist, I thought back to the power of story, which is, that's really, there's an old saying that some conflicts are so difficult, they can only be healed with a story. And so I thought back to the story of Ibrahim, of Abraham, this legendary story that is really the origin myth of the Middle East and that connects the Middle East to the rest of the world. There are billions of people for whom that story is important, that connects us. And at the heart of that story is the experience that Abraham has of hospitality, of both receiving hospitality as he wanders and of giving hospitality, of keeping his tent open in all four directions. And that's really the heart of the path and the heart of the Middle East. And the way that hospitality is elicited is you walk. You walk humbly into villages and you stay with people and you walk in the footsteps of Abraham. So if you take story, hospitality, and walking as the three secret ingredients of the path, it creates an acronym of show. And to me, that's what the Abraham path does, is it's an attempt to show what's possible, to show the world the truth behind the Middle East, which is this ancient tradition of taking care of the stranger, to me, which is the heart of the Middle East. So that's the origin of the path.
Well, this is quite remarkable, and there's this conception, William, that you had and quickly shared with others. But the difference between a conception and a reality is a first step. And one of those first steps was an inaugural journey that three of our panelists participated in, Susan, William, and Osama. We'd like to show a short film about that early journey to learn whether this thing might be feasible, and then look at some impressions that those who joined that trip have looking back.
Many places that are rich in history and religious significance, peoples who are hospitable.
The ditch around the castle is 30th century AD, built on the Roman time grave.
We've concluded that there's this enormous potential for greater understanding, for greater development of tourism, as a chance to really have the world see what is the true situation here in this land.
الله نوري وخلاصي فممن أخاف الله نوري وخلاصي.
Exactly. So, the first thing I want to describe is this place. This is a sister.
The Abraham Path Initiative is international. It affirms the dignity of all people.
Saladin wrote in his diaries the following. He said, I felt like a man being led to his death when my uncle Shero asked me to come with him to Egypt.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
هون إبراهيم الخليل
مسجد يعني
مسجد.
أيوة. What a place.
We know that peace within our hearts, within ourselves.
We've just traveled all the way from Turkey through Syria and Jordan, in the land of Palestine, where the prophet Abraham is buried. Our hope is that through deeper understanding and through respectful tourism and economic development,
the land of the prophet,
that this path may, at least in a small way, contribute to justice and peace in this region.
Finishing that inaugural journey, I'm curious. In some ways, a business school professor might call that a proof of concept, but reactions after you finished this journey, and then looking back, what do you take from that journey? Let me start with Susan, if I might.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that video. Hello, everyone, and as managing director of the program on negotiation, back when Williams had this idea, and anytime William has an idea, I get excited and I always want to support it. And the idea was both simple, a walking trail, and extremely complex through multiple countries and cultures and religions. And they were going to do this inaugural trip. And I thought as managing director, I really should go because this was under the auspices of Harvard University. So it was amazing. I like to say we put our boots on the ground there and traveled through Turkey, Syria, into Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and looked at the various places where the trail could be. And the trip 15 years ago was wonderful, but it was also extremely difficult. Logistically, I'm sure it was for those who organized it, William and Josh and others. But also, who were we to be telling people you should create trails in your country and your communities? And we had these meetings set up with archaeologists, historians, government officials, tourism operators, researchers, and we came and said, this is a vision we have. And William always liked to say, more walk, less talk. And I think one of the beauties of this idea that he had of the Abraham Path was we suggest how they might create trails, what the benefits would be. Little businesses could grow up along the way. Could be like the Camino or the Appalachian Trail in America. And we sort of were the spark to get it going, but then giving the idea away so that people on the ground in their own countries can choose to create or not these walking trails. And it's actually been amazingly successful with so many kilometers of walking trails in these countries. And I like the way the Abraham Path is resilient. The war in Syria, all kinds of difficulties along the way. And we just keep muscling on and being open to being helpful, I think I would say, to people as they want to create these trails.
It feels almost like this is an idea that was latent and had been there, but by this trip, you kind of gave explicit expression to it, and people resonated. It sounds as if, you felt, was it a bit arrogant to say you could, get something going and tell people that they should create walking trails? But it almost sounds like it was more of a spark than it was, in any case, a real push. What do you think, Susan?
Yes, I think it was both. And I think ideas like this are definitely so ambitious. And William would say, this will be 100 years to create these trails. But you plant the seeds and you get things starting and you inspire people. People in Brazil have been inspired. People around the world contribute to this and help make it possible. And we say, go do some of the hiking. It's a wonderful way to visit Southwest Asia as a different kind of tourist, where you're taking these walks with people who are your home hosts or the hospitality of Abraham. and just get away from what we read in the news all the time about that part of the world and experience the incredibly rich culture and the Abrahamic hospitality that's just magnificent.
Oh, this is interesting. William, you had this notion, people in Boulder resonated to it. There, with huge efforts, was this inaugural journey put together, especially with you and with Josh, to orchestrate it. And then you went to sort of test. What did you think as that journey concluded? What impression did you have? And then kind of looking back, what lingers from those early steps?
Well, I want to say too that there are a lot of people who organized this, including Elias and Osama, who's there on the call, who was a huge help in helping us think about how to get from, because that's what people said. People said, the idea, we had been studying the idea at Harvard, doing due diligence on it for a number of years, 2-3 years. And most people said, you can't do this. You cannot cross those boundaries. I mean, there's conflict going on, wars, you can't do that. And so it finally came to the conclusion the only way was to show, was to show that it could be done. And I put out a call and we had 25 people from 10 different countries, from Brazil, from various countries in Europe, from North America, from Pakistan. And we also had the proverbial imam and a priest and a minister and a rabbi, just for good measure, because it was following in the footsteps of this ancient story. As I look back on it, it was, we don't think of ourselves as creating the Abraham path. It's more like dusting off the footsteps of this ancient journey, because all along the path, people have cultural memory. They remember, if you go to Aleppo, which was one of the great cities, sadly very damaged in the war, but the name Aleppo Halab, it just refers back to the journey of Abraham. It means milk, and Abraham stopped there to milk his goats, to give milk to the poor. So it means social justice. It means human rights. It means hospitality. And so all along the path, we were just recognizing that this path was waiting to be reborn, because all the memories, it's like the path is a little bit like a necklace with all these jewels, from Jerusalem to Damascus to Mecca to Urfa and so on, all along the way. And I, looking back on it now, I'm humbled actually by just how many people it's inspired to walk, the tens of thousands of people it's inspired to walk. And one of the things I know about paths, having studied paths, is that as long as conflicts last, and they can have cycles, it can go many generations, paths, like the ancient path of Santiago de Compostela, which started off as a replacement for the ancient pilgrimage to Jerusalem, actually, which had everything to do with the Middle East. Paths last much longer. And so it's a longer cycle, it's slower, it's humbler, and you meet person by person. And each person who walks that path and experiences the hospitality and experiences the walk, I think in some small way at least is transformed. And that connection is what is needed to remind us of the message of Ibrahim, of Abraham, which is that we're all connected, we're all one in some way.
And there were a lot of difficulties that you encountered and that you knew would encounter. People are scared, borders are difficult to cross, suspicions run rife. People said, is this really a dialogue amongst religions? Is this peace building? And each of those carried some baggage that would have been pretty tough to overcome. But instead, connection, tourism, that these were and hospitality, these were values. And it seems like the bureaucratic and the state-given obstacles were very much there and very pragmatically dealt with and dealing with. But this is a sense of that initial journey. But if we could look a little more toward the present, because what I think is astonished and delighted me and a lot of other people who've had some association with the path is that from this conception of Abraham, and this, primordial origin story, the notion that one could actually realize a physical path and a virtual path, but especially a physical path in this region, with emerging parts in several countries now, and that well predates them as countries, that this could happen. And from my perspective, as somebody who lives and breathes negotiation, this has been an extended, you might think of, negotiation campaign to, supply a lot of energy towards something that we hope is kind of self-organizing and decentralized and thriving of its own, but it requires a lot of energy and input to start. So I'd like to look kind of toward the present, and here really I'd be happy to turn to Anisa, if you'd like to comment on the present a little bit in your role. William, Susan, and then there's a special role for Ali in this conversation, which I want to focus on in a few moments. But Anisa, the present implementation, what lessons, what surprises, what insights?
Well, there's not a day that goes by without a surprise. I'll have to tell you that. But we keep showing up and we keep moving forward as we may. This is an incredibly complex part of the world in which we are working. And we have to be respectful. We have to be humble. We have to be listening more than we speak. And so when I came on, I was originally a board member, Jim, if you remember, but the actual work of trail building was happening in the field. We had a larger team than we do now, and we got investment, and I look forward to Ali's comments on the investment from the World Bank, but also from others, to send some of the best communicators I've ever met into towns and villages, among them Dan Adamson, among them Josh Weiss, who's just finished the term as chair of the organization, to talk with people in each town and say, what would it mean for your community, for tourists, internationals to come through and talk with you, sit with you, eat with you, buy your goods, pay for a lunch. What would that mean? And this was a real long series of negotiations in many, many towns along the way, in Jordan and in the West Bank and in Turkey. And hats off to the teams that got that work done and then brought in the support of locals, co-create the trails that followed, as William said, the previous trails, the goat trails, the donkey trails, the sheep trails, and create linkages among them and between the towns.
Yeah.
A lot of work.
Yeah, Susan?
I think
Insights, surprises?
Yeah, I think what has been so wonderful to hear is the experiences people are already having on the Abraham Path. Someday, hopefully all the trails will connect up. We'll go into Iraq, maybe other countries. But right now, people are hiking. Of course, the pandemic put a slowdown to our organized trips, but people are having those experiences with the people making tea along the trail or selling some wares or benefiting. And so those early conversations, how might your community benefit? Now we have real stories that people say, these are the ways we are benefiting. This is like an amazing experience for us. And one thing, I just happened to have the National Geographic Traveler magazine. Several years ago, they named the Abraham Path the #1 new international walking trail in the world. It's just amazing to me how this idea, with difficulties and challenges, but still is coming to fruition, is happening. I don't think there's ever any going back from that. People are out walking and enjoying it and experiencing these international, meeting tourists from from Spain or Iceland or South America or whatever. It's just, it's priceless and really a beautiful thing.
If I may jump onto that, Jim, one of the things that surprised us in the mid 2010s, 2015, 16, when internationals were a little less easy about going to Jordan and well, couldn't go to Syria by then either, but less able to visit because of the scourge of ISIS. People didn't want to go; they were afraid. And what we saw happen was that local people started to enjoy these walking trails, and a culture of walking began to emerge among Jordanians and Palestinians and people in Turkey and Egypt also. It was in Sinai, Eastern Sinai. So it was a very nice surprise, one that we had not anticipated to see that happen. And I think now with COVID also, probably there are more local people walking than internationals, although the international tourism opportunity is starting to open again.
And William, if I could turn to you for sort of two related topics. One is, could you say a little bit about the development of the path, erratic as it's been, but forward overall, in the different geographies? Because whether it was Turkey or whether it's in Palestine or elsewhere, it's had a sort of distinctive and somewhat different life. But to talk a little bit about those the regional aspects, as well as from your perspective, surprises and insights now as we look back.
You know, Jim, when we were first talking about the idea, I was wondering, what, creating or inspiring a network of walking trails across the Middle East had to do with negotiation, only to soon discover that it had everything to do with negotiation, that like walking, negotiation, you have to go around a lot of different obstacles to get to your way, and you wind. And so the path, started with, by listening to what people along the path wanted, and where there was initial interest. And there was a lot of initial interest actually in Palestine and the West Bank in particular. And what emerged was there was a kind of a consortium emerged of Palestinian NGOs, organizations, wildlife, tourism, universities that wanted to take this on. And it sort of gradually emerged. We were very much following kind of an emergent model of really listening for where there was resonance and where it would emerge. And same thing happened in Turkey. Actually, there was a lot of interest in that part of Turkey, which is northern Mesopotamia, where the whole city of Urfa is built around the story of the birth of Abraham. I mean, that's the central park are these huge, long reflecting pools, which is where they believed, Abraham was catapulted into the fire, and the fire was turned into water. And so it was embedded. And so that's where it began. And then also in Jordan, in the highlands of northern Jordan, actually. So in different places, and in all those places, there was the interest, there were also concerns. When you bring connection, what shows up, of course, are the forces that are suspicious of connection or fear connection, and that's the natural part of the evolution of the path. And so for every advance, there was a surprise, there was a little setback, there was suspicion. And as you know, in a traumatized region like the Middle East, it's natural to have conspiracy theories and so on. And so a lot of it was slowly showing up, building trust person by person, really. And there were these waves that came across, whether it was wars, whether it was the emergence of ISIS and so on. And so there were always challenges that needed to be navigated. The thing I take away is that if the path could, like a seed, take root in probably the 15 of the most tumultuous years in the Middle East in recent history, and most conflictual, then it can survive because it's a long-term survival. And that story in that region has been around for 4,000 years. And so there's a way in which it will continue. And so to me, a lot of the lesson is keep showing up, show up again and again and again, and don't be deterred by, temporary setbacks. Just, it's like a walk. You keep on moving forward.
I wonder if we might turn to Ali, who really has had such an important role in part in his association with the World Bank. Ali, could you describe a little bit your connection to the Path, and then how the bank got involved, what happened with its really substantial contribution to its development?
Sure, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'm very privileged to be also connected to the Path and have contributed to its development in the Middle East. It wasn't a typical story where the bank is one of those large international financing institutions that typically get into big loans and big policy loans, investment loans, and so forth. So coming to them with the idea of supporting a small path in the West Bank, Palestine, and then thinking of connecting it to other parts of the Middle East was really a puzzle to our management in the beginning. And they started to question, like, what is the angle we're looking at? Is it for, as some of the panelists actually said, I mean, is it a peace project? Is it a cultural project? What is this? I mean, and we started to unpack it with them and saying, like, well, first, it is economic growth, because basically we're going to support additional income to families and to people who are in the West Bank. These people are usually not in the mainstream of getting income from the big developments happening in the big cities. Second, it's tourism, because as we've seen in the trend of tourism in the West Bank, they've been focused for business in Ramallah and then for religious tourism in Bethlehem. But beyond these two cities, no one goes anywhere. I mean, probably in Hebron from some trade, but it's still very minimal. So the idea of growing tourism beyond these cities was a fascinating idea for diversification and going in geographies that are not in the mainstream, and also diversifying your products, because all of those who visit the West Bank were looking at either doing business in Ramallah or meeting the government, or doing religious tourism in Bethlehem, but introducing the idea that you can do cultural tourism, community connected tourism, and in some parts, adventure tourism was quite unique and new. And that added to the mix of the products that the tourism sector would offer in Palestine. So that was a nice second angle. And then we went to a third angle, which wasn't exactly my area of expertise, but I thought it was very relevant because we were looking for who to finance. And then we thought, what about the social cohesion angle, which is quite interesting, that the typical Palestinian in the West Bank city of Ramallah or Bethlehem will actually probably go once in a lifetime to visit one of those villages in the suburbs and see how they make the olive oil or the Nablus soap or the other interesting herbal tea in some of the mountainous areas. So people don't know them, and they have this social cohesion issue that you don't know your country, your place. So that was an interesting angle to also look at from a social perspective, and it actually was important because we looked within the bank and we found that there's a trust fund which was interested in social cohesion, and then we thought, okay, then this is the angle to get to the trust fund, and that's also like aligning well with my department's objectives of economic development in the tourism sector in specific. So it started, I mean, it was a 4 or 5 year engagement. It started in 2014 and it went on until 2018 or so. We concluded this project with a lot of I would say, support from the management that this was a satisfactorily implemented project with very high ratings across the board. And the idea is that with the total amount that was provided, which is around 3.3 billion USD, we managed to do a lot of difference, and we have monitored and recorded that. So even the way to measure success was new to us, because we're used to looking at, like, here's the baseline, here's the result, you just do the difference and that's it. And here it was different. And was it jobs or income, or actually other types of social cohesion, like engagement of women groups, youth groups, and others? Or it's all of the above, and you need a new way to look at it. And the latter was the answer, actually. And therefore, we had to do a very interesting way of mapping who are the first-hand stakeholders and beneficiaries, who are the second-hand or indirect, and then started to do a survey work across these all to set a baseline. And then we did another survey work a year afterwards, and the year after that. And that's the way we started to be able to measure how can we tell the right story of Abraham Path in Palestine. And in a nutshell, it was a successful project which engaged more than 40-50% beneficiaries of women. It had youth engaged across the board. It has generated additional revenues of around $4.8 million for the communities that were engaged. And at the end of it, in 2018, we had more than 47,000 people who actually walked the path. And just to tell you a bit of specificity here, I mean, even counting those people, we had people standing at the entry points that were natural for each community, and just having those, like the clock ticker or whatever that is, where they would count everyone coming in. So it was really unique for the bank to work on that system. So in a nutshell, it was a very interesting project. I myself have went from someone who knew a bit about the conventional tourism into probably one of the like emerging experts in the community-based tourism in the World Bank now. And the experience went way out of Palestine to Jordan, as you know, where I've seen how Jordan Trail have been looking at what the Abraham Path was doing. Also, when we introduced it in Saudi Arabia, on the Red Sea side, they found it fascinating. Actually, they adopted the model and they started to develop it in the areas where the weather is mild, close to the Yemen borders in the south. And even beyond that, we received actually requests, and we did that, of presenting the project to Pakistan to look at the experience and how it works. So it became a practice actually in the bank after that interesting and very successful experience. So I think we are still very much committed to supporting, I would say, walking trails, community-based trails in the region. It is now a product in the mix that we are providing to countries. And even in Palestine, we are going to finance a new phase. The new phase is going to build on what happened earlier in a way that it's going to use Abraham Path as the backbone of economic development in underserved communities by creating more businesses across this path to provide services and goods to travelers, and at the same time introducing technology where you can support individual travelers' experience so that they don't need to struggle in finding the right guide or the right place or understanding more about the site in front of them. So using GPS coordinates, augmented reality, and other technologies would help us do that. So again, in closing, I think it was an amazing experience. I myself have benefited professionally and personally from that. And we thank you very much for your leadership and mainly thought leadership in putting this forward.
Ali, this is really interesting and thought-provoking for us. I can see how internal to the bank, as you were trying to figure out how a match might be, one even could think of this as a problem-solving negotiation that was successful. externally as you pretty systematically surveyed stakeholders, sought their involvement, got their involvement. And then I love the fact that this is a kind of a pilot project of a walking trail tourism enhancing idea that has a reality in Palestine, and that by itself is significant learning for those of us involved from an early stage. People thought the path would take root primarily in Turkey, given all the tourism infrastructure and so forth, and lo and behold, it turns out to be Palestine that has kind of taken the lead role, and there's just a that kind of learning is really key. I think you've really pointed to a lot of the potential physical future of the trail on the ground, but I would welcome Susan, Anisa, and William's brief thoughts, going forward. Yes, one step after the other. Yes, continuing to press, kind of priming this pump, if you will, so that it becomes self-generating. But how should we think about, and what do we hope for, the physical future of the path in the region? Maybe Susan, could I start with you, Anisa, and then William?
Sure. Boy, Ali, that was so interesting. There's a lot I didn't know there about the history. And it reminds me that the Abraham Path can engage all the senses and all the parts of ourselves. And we look at the journalists who have written about it. We look at the wonderful young people we have out there right now, waymarking the trail in some of these countries, in places that are very wild and untraveled. And I think of the artists who are inspired by this, and how the photographs and the artwork and then the craftspeople who have made things to sell along the way, and then the entrepreneurial people. So all of that enhances the path, and the path enhances all that work. So I just see it growing in ways we can't imagine yet. And hopefully, we keep the spark and we keep the push, and it just grows exponentially.
The path is both physical and virtual, and there's a strong complementarity between the two. And I think that's a huge investment and innovation. But particularly on the physical path, how do you see that developing over time? Hopes, expectations?
What we are doing right now is gently and with regularity and respect showing up in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And we are introducing the idea of a long distance walking trail. We have about 200 kilometers in mind. And we are introducing the idea of having local guides, walk internationals, and possibly locals also through this territory. We are introducing the idea of homestays. We are introducing the idea of entrepreneurship along the course of this road, because the people of the northern part of Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan, they're walkers by nature. They've used the mountains to survive generations of war and conflict and difficulties. The mountains have protected them, and the mountains have given them the bounty of food. The mountains have been their friend. And now I've heard people say, so it is our time now to show off and thank our mountains for what they've done for us. And so we're doing that, but we don't want to be the American-based NGO that goes in and tells people what to do. What we want to be is an American NGO that catalyzes and inspires local communities to see what they want to do and to see whether this is going to work for them. So as a catalyst kind of organization, what we're doing in Iraq is introducing the idea and presenting some funding to make it possible, to bring teams together, to make, because money's required to get almost anything done, but to do that, invest as we did through the World Bank, as we did in Palestine, and as we did with the help of the Flora Foundation in Eastern Sinai. We want to also catalyze international and global interest in traveling to the region once they can again. So when you say on the ground, Jim, our role is to suggest and remind people this is an extraordinary place to travel, breathtakingly beautiful. You are stunned by the generosity of the people you meet along the way. I sit at my home in Maplewood, and we sit on the porch sometimes in the evening, and I look at people walking by, and I say, come on up and have an evening, repast with us, please. Let's see you. But that's second nature over there. So our role is to catalyze interest, to remind people there's more in common than there's different among all human beings, and that whatever you may be hearing in the news media about reasons to fear the region, there are more reasons not to fear the region. And that's the big role we're playing. And we can do that more online and in our internet programming now than we can specifically on the ground because of the pandemic.
So we're honored to be joined by Osama Al Nouri, whom I introduced early on, but before, in just a moment, we turn to questions from the audience. Osama, I wonder if I could ask you for a few impressions of the path now. You were on the inaugural trip, and you've been a friend of the path for a long time. A few strong impressions, insights that you've had from this. It's great you're able to join.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. I'm honored to be with you. The Abraham Path is really a game changer in the region. It opened windows, and I think that would be very hard to close again, into a different approach into looking at issues in the region, packaging the history in the region within a socioeconomic content that can give hope and that can give aspiration to generations and hopefully generations yet to come. Of course, with the complexities of the region, the path through the last 15 years offered chances of finding alternatives of all types, political, socioeconomic, and even in the hard relationships between countries in the region and beyond. And for many people in the region, in fact, the Abraham Path from that perspective can offer a real new content into looking at our own history in the region and reshape probably our future within a kind of a new set of relationships based on integrity, respect of all, the fact that countries in the region, probably people along within a global content can look at this area of the world and can help find ways out for the long conflicts in the region and probably really affect the lives of many, especially the lives of people that were affected by the conflict, had actually little to say in the conflict in that perspective. And from here, that is very important to be able to give hope and give aspiration. Walking through the path for years have introduced me to great people, in fact, both locals from the region that we, a person, an urbaner like myself, probably don't come along to see each now and then, and international friends and colleagues that are walking after a purpose, common purpose that can together put those relationships in the service of the people. People in the region deserve more. People in the region deserve hope. And in fact, I mean, many of the countries of the world did not do enough to really support the people in the region. In fact, many of the countries didn't do the right things for long years. And this is a chance for us to really try to settle that kind of formula and to reshape things for the future.
Thank you, Osama. You've, Anisa, been monitoring the questions, and I wonder if you could lead off with that piece of the discussion.
Happy to. Jerry White brings forward the question. It says, I always wonder how API navigates the brand energy of Abraham or Ibrahim. Our website and communications emphasize that we're nonpartisan, non-sectarian, non-political, non-profit, non-violent. And he asks, are we simply fending off regional conspiracy theories by listing our we are nots? He asks, what are we for? And who should take that question?
I think, William, could you could you say affirmatively what this
Sure.
path is about, as
We're,
opposed to what it's not?
we're for one thing, which is people, humanity. Abraham, that story reminds us of our common humanity, that we're all, no matter what our differences are, and they're deep and they're beautiful, we're all one family. That's the myth, or the mythos of Abraham, is that we're all one family, and reminds us that that people, that hospitality, that the heart of taking care of a stranger who shows up at your door is absolutely key. And what more important message is there for a world today where people are on the move, where they're refugees, where they're going to be, unfortunately, because of climate, even more refugees and so on, than the message of taking care of the other? And there's no place in the world, bar none, where that tradition of hospitality is more deeply ingrained in the culture than in the Middle East. And I know that for a lot of people that may seem surprising, but that is the heart of, that's the heart of the brand. We are pro people, we are pro hospitality, we're pro humanity.
Anisa.
Raju Bhatt wonders how we mitigate the risks. He's particularly interested, and Ali brought this up, there's been invitations from Pakistan, for example. Raju says, can this be done in an area like Kashmir, where there seem to be other actors who are not invested in peace and harmony? So what is the transferability of this work?
Anisa, I wonder if you might briefly answer that question. In your role, I think that would be appropriate.
There are no guarantees, Raju. You have to get in there and accept the anger. If it comes at you, you accept the love when it comes at you, and the love does come at you. And be nimble and be willing to dance with the circumstances that present themselves. Anything is possible, as William has indicated, with that hope and the knowledge that there's more that connects us than keeps us apart. But not everybody's ready for that.
That's a fair statement. Ali, you were institutionally involved in this development, and now kind of using it elsewhere. But in virtually all the regions you mentioned, many people have deep concerns about safety, about risk. How do you think about that? How can that be mitigated? It's a very important question. If you think of barriers to the creation and expansion of the path, that's a big felt one.
It's complicated. I mean, as Anisa said, because there are two target groups for the path. First, it's the local community, and then you have visitors coming from abroad. So I would say that local community have easier possibility to navigate the area and versus the visitors that come from abroad. And we could see it in places like Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Palestine, that even when we had Corona situation improving a little bit during last summer, there was a surge in number of like walkers who are domestic in Jordan and the Red Sea area and in Palestine. So these people are accustomed to living with the surrounding, and they're okay with working with the current risks that they can mitigate. But I'm afraid that the situation will be harder for those who come from abroad. Nevertheless, the good news that based on what we have analyzed over the years, that this type of tourism is actually one that bounces back quite quickly after rounds of turmoil or conflict. And we've seen that in Palestine, where like once the situation gets a little bit calmer, you will get people back again walking around. And there's nothing wrong with the local travelers and visitors, by the way, because these are like 60-70% of those who walk Abraham Path in Palestine, and they do get to support the families around. And that probably gives me the opportunity, since I have the mic, to also relate to the question before by saying that Abraham Path also supports the poor and vulnerable in connecting to better life conditions and opportunities.
We have other questions, but time is so tight. So we're going to close this conversation in a moment with a video that I think is will be both interesting and inspiring. Just before we do so, William, last thoughts?
Last thought is gratitude for all of you and all of the people on the call who made this possible. It's astonishing if you think of when we were taking that journey 15 years ago, if we could have imagined that, as Ali put it, 47,000 people or more would be walking in Palestine, 80,000 in Jordan, in Turkey, in all of these places, in the midst of all these difficulties, locals and internationals. It's astonishing, and it's humbling. And so I just, and it wouldn't have been possible with all the people on the call, with Osama, with Ali, with all the countless hosts on the path, the families that welcome people in, the travelers, the people who build trust. And it's our motto is, as a path, it's step by step. And that's the way it goes. So I just want to thank you all. And I hope that if we have a call like this in 15 years, we'll be able to look and see just how this path has developed from these initial seeds. Thanks to all of you.
And turning it finally over to Anisa, I would also note that we've not really discussed all the other parts of the world in which thousands of people have actively rallied and taken activities on behalf of and inspired by the path. It's not just virtual, it's not just in the region, but it's caught the hearts and minds of many. Anisa, could you introduce the film that we'll watch in closing?
So we're going to leave you with a short film about a project that came in 2019, an initiative by Abraham Path in Palestine, which was bringing young Palestinians who are growing up in refugee camps onto the path to have a chance to see this place that they've only heard about for so very long. So we'll take you on a walk on the Masar Ibrahim, the path of Abraham in Palestine with these youngsters. And thank you all for being with us, and many, many thanks to our panelists.
اليوم كنت مع طلاب وطلبات الخليل، مشيت فيهم مسار اللي هو مسار وادي القلد، بداية من دير القديس جورج ووصولا لأردن.
معظم الرحل المدرسية بنطلعها على منتزهات منتجعات، ولكن إنه أول مرة بنروح على مسار.
المسار كان كتير حلو، واستمتعوا الطلاب والطالبات وتعلموا على مناطق جديدة وطيور جديدة ونباتات جديدة.
كانت رحلة تعليمية وترفيهية بنفس الوقت.
هذا الدير القديس جون من التبن اللي هي منطقة في مصر.
تقريبا غطينا معظم النقاط عن كاسة الورق اللي بنشرب فيها مبلغ 12 سنة.
إذا بنضلنا نتبع هدول العلامات بنكون احنا ماشيين على المسار الصحيح. هذه الألوان الاثنين مستعملة نظام أوروبي، هو نظام عالمي من العلامات وتحديد المسارات.
إنه أنا بجد أول مرة بزور هذه المناطق وعجبت فيها لحد كبير. شفت شلالات، شفت أشياء أول مرة بشوفها بحياتي.
كمان لما نيجي نخيم، نحن رايحين من الناس وين نحط الخيام؟
احنا طبعا بندعي الجمعيه لتنظيم مثل هيك رحلات لمدارس بهذا السن وبهذا العمر، لانه احنا بنفتقر كثير لمعرفه بارضنا وبتضاريسها وببيئتها الطبيعيه.
فلسطين ابدا ما شفنا زي هيك بيئه جميله جدا، ننصح الجميع انه يزور هيك منطقه.
كمان شفنا كثير نباتات وتسلقنا جبال عاليه ومشينا مسافات كثير
سعيدة. كثير المسار كان حلو، احنا بنشكر المسار إبراهيم على هاي المبادرة الحلوة.